Dun 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 dun. All right, hello there, world history people. Let's learn all about Japan and Korea today. So, Japan, I think probably one of the coolest countries on planet Earth. It's had civilization ever since 1000 BC. I want you to know where it is. It's on the super far end of Asia. It's about as far away from Europe as you can get, and super cool place. So yeah, know what's up with Japan. All right, let me bounce on through all this. So here's some Japanese art from back in the day. Here's the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, cherry blossom trees. Once again, cherry blossom trees and Mount Fuji in the background. That's right outside of Tokyo. And then, yep, Japan's way over there, far away from everything else. All right, cool. So Japanese society, it was organized, weirdly enough, almost the exact same as medieval Europe's feudalism. And historians are just kind of like baffled, like, how is it that society of Europe's Middle Ages was basically the same as Japan society, and it just shows that maybe there's some like intrinsic organizational structures in human society. But anyway, so this is what Japan's society was structured for almost their entire history. The vast majority of people were serfs. They were the peasant rice farmers at the bottom of society's totem pole. Above them were the knights. They were called samurai in Japan. The daimyo, they were sort of in charge of various samurai, and the daimyo, you could think of them maybe like mayors or maybe like small governors. And then above the daimyo was the shogun. He was the king of Japan. The shogun had, for the most part, the most power, but technically above the shogun was the emperor of Japan, and Japan still has an emperor to this day. Some of you probably didn't know that. But the Emperor of Japan, he's more of a spiritual advisor. He's someone who like gives advice. And there's only a couple times in history where the Emperor of Japan kind of usurped the shogun or usurped the government. And I'll talk about those times when they occur. But yeah, so anyway, this is Japanese societal structure, Japanese feudalism. Let's check it out. So, yep, that's sort of all the things I just said. The emperor is at the top, but he's not as in charge as the shogun is. Okay, and then yeah, it says right there once again the emperor was at the top. He had little real power. Used it a couple times in history, and then below them the shogun, the samurai, so on, so on. And then yep, there's the emperor in his traditional clothes. The shogun, the leader of Japan, and there's people doing the rice farming thing. I like the guy with the basket on his head. That's kind of funny. And then, yeah, here's a samurai dude. And then samurai and knights. What are they all about? Check it out. All right. And so Japanese society was a clan-based culture. It was like this until the 1880s. Okay, so Japan did this for a long, long time. They kept order through a warrior knight class called the samurai. I mentioned them in the last slide. And the samurai had something called the Code of Bushido. Bushido translates to English as the way of the warrior. It dictates how soldiers are supposed to live their lives. It's sort of a moral code that all Japanese warriors, and really everybody at Japanese society, is all sort of supposed to respect, but especially if you're a warrior or a samurai. So I'll zoom in on some of the specifics of the Bushido code. But it's interesting that European knights had kind of a similar cultural thing too, called chivalry. So it's such an interesting mirrored image of societal structures that kind of defies explanation. All right, so this is Hagakure. It translates to the shadow of the leaves, and this is kind of the book all about the samurai. It sort of says the Bushido code. It's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. That's cool. And here we go. The seven virtues of Bushido: Gi, integrity; Ri, respect; Yu, heroic courage; Mio, honor; Jin, compassion; Makoto, honesty and sincerity; and Shu, duty and loyalty. So that's what it means to be a samurai, kids. That's pretty cool. All right, here's some samurai, and this is a picture of an actual samurai. Like we had or we have not color, but we had cameras that took black and white pictures back in the 1880s. So real samurai in action. That's some cool stuff. Okay, so Japanese culture values honor above all else. You are always supposed to do what the person above you says. You are supposed to give everything your best effort. And if you fail in whatever task has been asked of you, it's sort of seen as culturally appropriate to kill yourself. It's really really hardcore. Um, yeah, and like look here in the United States and a whole lot of European traditions, it's like suicide is not cool. Suicide is really really bad. And let me say that to all my students. Suicide is really really bad. There's always a better way. But I'll tell you, when I was living in South Korea, which has some aspects of Japanese culture, they also kind of shared in this idea a little bit that like if you really screwed up bad, uh, you know, off yourself. And I'm just like, whoa, like I disagree with that wholeheartedly. But anyway, a big part of kind of the samurai culture was if you failed your emperor, your shogun, your daimyo, you were sort of expected to do suicide in this ritualistic way called seppuku or harikiri. And there's a bunch of pictures of it. But yeah, these guys are just kind of cutting their guts open. And it's pretty hardcore. So it just shows the incredible loyalty and the incredible honor dictation and the following of the rules that is a big part of Japanese culture. Thankfully, there's not a whole lot of this going on in Japan today, but there's like this whole idea that like you don't make mistakes is pretty ingrained in a lot of East Asian culture. All right, so this is a guy just doing the whole slicing it up thing. Here's a guy taking it in the gut. And here's a guy zapping himself. And look, the blood splatter is Japan. Whoa, that's kind of crazy. All right, here's a cool little side note. Um, I think it's interesting that you can sort of understand a culture by trying to translate their understanding of the meaning of life. And in Japanese, there's this interesting word called ikagi. Ikagi translates to a reason for being. So, what is your ikagi? Like, if you're doing something, are you experiencing ikagi while you do it? And the easier, the kind of more complex translation of ikagi is it kind of combines all the elements that you see here. And if you are doing something that is your job, it's something you love doing, it's something that gives you a worldly mission, and it's something that you really have some skill in, then you should experience this kind of awesome feeling of ikagi. It should give you this reason for being. So, really, like I think it would be interesting for you to dwell on this for a little bit and think like, in my life, what career path, what mission, what concept do I want to pursue? And if the answer is ikagi, then according to Japanese culture, you're doing the right thing. You're doing what you're meant to do. So that's cool. Okay, so now let's actually deep dive into Japan's history. So, Japan was a relatively stable country until a period called the Sengoku Jidai. So, for the vast majority of Japan's history, there's probably some little samurai wars and stuff, but for the most part, it was just feudal Japan, samurai, daimyo, shogun, living it up. But in 1460, the shogun Ashikaga Yashimasa, he died and he didn't have any kids. So all these different daimyo were like, well, I should be the next shogun. No, I should be the next shogun. No, I should be the next shogun. And for the next 150 years, a epic civil war raged up and down Japan. And this was a civil war unlike any other too, because it was sort of like a free-for-all civil war. They basically turned the island of Japan into an epic game of Fortnite, and everybody's just murdering each other. Yeah, it claims the lives of millions of Japanese. This was undoubtedly the craziest period to be in Japan, and I think I can confidently say the most epic civil war in all of world history. And it's just samurai dueling it up all over the dang islands. So let's check it out. Man, this is some Japanese historical art. It's just my favorite thing, kids. Look at this horse getting shot with arrows. These samurai guys fighting them off hardcore. They're burning down places. And look, here's another. This is a picture that's like 800 years old, okay? And this guy's just sliced a dude's head off. Like, that's crazy to me. That's crazy how much detail the Japanese put in their art from the past. All right, yeah, here's some other stuff. And there they are just battling it out. Just civil war all over Japan. And Of course, this happens. During the middle of the Sengoku Jidai, white people show up for the first time in Japan, especially some Portuguese trading ships, and they find these southern islands of Japan, and they do kind of the standard process. They're like, "Hey, have you guys heard of Jesus? What do you guys like to eat? Do you got any gold?" And the Japanese say, yes, or they say no, yes, and yes. And the Portuguese start sharing Christian values. And then the Japanese are like, look, we'll give you some of our tea, some of our gold, some of our silver, some of our silk, but we need stuff to fight this civil war. We got to actually win this thing. And so certain clans start trading with the Portuguese for European guns. And the Japanese, overall, though, they don't really fully trust these Europeans that came from so far away. And not too many Europeans even get all the way to Japan. It's really far out there. And but anyway, so the Japanese do participate in trade with Europe for the next 50 years or so. And an interesting fact is during this period, the Japanese actually solved their civil war very briefly, and all of Japan is united under one guy. They invade Korea for like 10 years, but then that one shogun is killed, and Japan goes right back into their civil war again. So they have this kind of break where they fight the Koreans, and I'll deep dive into that more tomorrow, or really in my next video. So, yeah. But anyway, so they get guns from Europeans, and now they're fighting their civil war with also European weapons. So, yeah, let's check it out. Here's a Japanese account of their first interaction with Europeans. And they drew pictures of it. And I think their interpretation is so interesting. They think white people just have the fattest legs. And it's probably because they had like poofy sailor pants. And also, I mean, who was with these Europeans but probably a slave kid on the ship? So they even saw black people in Japan back in the year 500. So that's interesting fact too. And then, yeah, here's some European. Look at like the gumpy way that European man is looking. That's so funny. And then here's their picture of these European ships, and they just have such a flavor in their drawing. There's so much artistic skill. I'm a fan. And then yeah, and as I said, the Europeans everywhere they go, they talk about Jesus, and some people in Japan started to worship Jesus, and the emperor and the shogun and the daimyos hated Christianity. Every time people started to convert to Christianity, the samurai would come in there and just stop it cold. So this was an incredibly anti-Christian country. It's pretty hardcore. And there they are with guns. They have this guy, big old gun, and there they are shooting at the samurai near the end of the Sengoku Jidai. Okay, so this crazy violent period finally came to an end when Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated his rivals at the Battle of Sekigahara in the year 1600. By all accounts, the Battle of Sekigahara is the most epic samurai battle of all time. It was a three-way battle. No one knew who would win. It was crazy. But in the end, Tokugawa is the winner. And Tokugawa, once he gets full control of Japan, he makes a pretty interesting decision. He says, all these guns that we bought from Europeans, we don't like them. They are a coward's weapon. We want samurai to fight each other in the open like the old days. Guns just kill people indiscriminately. So I'm going to find all the guns in Japan, and I'm going to throw them in the sea. We're going to get rid of them. And for the rest of history, we are not going to do any trading with the outside world. Japan's just going to cut itself off. We're going to do our own thing. It's going to be just like it was before the Sengoku Jidai. None of these Europeans messing with us, teaching their Jesus. We'll just keep Japan separate. And that whole concept is called Sakoku. And that Sakoku thing would go on for the next 254 years. So, definitely for the foreseeable future, Tokugawa set up a closed country. But in the year 1854, Japan's is going to get interacted again, but this time it'll be by the United States. And the United States of America is going to sort of transition Japan into a new stage of their history. But I'll talk about that once we get to the 1850s. All right, so yeah, that's cool. Let's check it out. So yeah, giving up the gun, Japan went back to the sword at the end of the Sengoku Jidai. That's cool. And there's the Battle of Sekigahara, and closing off Japan. Yep, they didn't want to do hardly any trading with anyone. They did do some trading with the Dutch, weirdly enough. But for the most part, they kept Europeans out. And then back to the old ways. All right, that's it for me. Peace out.